Hi everyone, Chris from Stone Age Gamer here. Now picture this. You go into your attic, you find a box of your old NES games. Oh wow, how exciting! Oh, but there's no system to play it on. Are you going to go out and try to track down an original Nintendo Entertainment System? That's not going to hook up to your fancy schmancy new HD TV. No. But they're also pretty expensive, right? You're going to track down an original Genesis or a Super Nintendo. Those things can be a bit spicy. You know what's not too spicy? Clone consoles. These guys play old cartridges through this fancy machine onto your modern television. This is the Classiq III from OldSkool. It does NES, Super NES, and Sega Genesis games. It's got HDMI output and AV output, and well, I think it's pretty neat. Let's take a look. Alright, here is the Classiq III. This is the console itself. It's inside of a pretty big box, but it comes with a bunch of stuff. It's got two of these controllers, got HDMI and AV, it's got a pretty standard USB power supply, and then of course the system itself. So this guy is about the same size as a Super Nintendo, as far as the amount of space it takes up. You got your clearly labeled Genesis, Super NES, and NES cartridge inputs here, and each one has their own power situation going on your NES, Super NES, Genesis, and off, and it just kind of clicks to the different one you're using. The reset button is just a button. So on the front, you've got your inputs for Super NES, NES, and Genesis style controllers. On the bottom here, this is pretty cool. This is a Super NES PAL or NTSC switch. So you can play PAL or NTSC Super NES games by switching this little switch here. And then on the back, you've got region switches for Super NES and for Genesis back here, as well as your aspect ratio switch, 4x3 or 16x9. You can turn your LEDs on and off. There's your HDMI output, your AV cables, and your power supply. And that's kind of the basics of the unit itself. It's pretty light, just like a Super Nintendo, but it feels really nice. And it's got the big logo going on here on the front, which, now I haven't turned this thing on, but something tells me this might glow. These look kind of like lights. I might be disappointed if those don't glow. Nah, I think they look cool. I think they're going to look cool no matter what. So let's take a little closer look at the controller. This is the controller for the Classiq. It's pretty thin, but it's also kind of beefy around here. It's got a pretty decent feeling D-pad. The edges are a little pointy, so if you're going to be playing a lot of Street Fighter, you might want to be prepared for that. But the buttons have a pretty solid give on them. They are laid out like a 6-button Genesis situation, but on the back here, you can choose between Nintendo or Sega style controls, and if it's on the N, then it's going to use these four as your face buttons and the shoulder buttons, or if you have it switched to S, it'll be like playing a Genesis 6 button. And you got your start and select, and again, the controller's got a pretty decent weight on it. It plugs in via the Super Nintendo port, and that is kind of the basics of what the system looks like. Let's see how it functions in action. Alright, so here we are with the Classiq III. I'm going to be using the regular controller here, and it's hard to tell on here, but there really isn't much in the way of input lag. I think there's like a tiny bit going on, like just a tiny bit, but it's pretty spot on, all things considered. And this Classiq pad works pretty decently. I'm not having any real problems with it here. Let's see if we switch this out with a regular NES controller to see how that works. Alright, I got my regular NES controller plugged in now, and I just unplugged and plugged it in. I didn't do anything, and it was pretty seamless, and this is, yeah, working like a charm. Here we go. Grab this mushroom here. Now, if you listen closely, you can hear that the sound emulation on this is not 1-to-1. It doesn't really sound exactly like the original NES, but it is playing at the correct speed, so it's not like a weird PAL thing where the music is playing the wrong notes at the wrong keys or anything. It just sounds a little different. Not necessarily a bad thing, but something that you should probably be aware of. But it looks like NES games work just fine here, so let's move on to Super NES, see how they react. Here we are, and here we are in Reptile Rumble. Here is we're playing Super Nintendo here. I'm using my original Super Nintendo controller, and you can hear there aren't really any sound emulation issues going on with the Super Nintendo. And yeah, again, the input lag is almost non-existent. Like, I'm not going to say there's zero input lag. I'm usually pretty sensitive to that kind of stuff, and I'm not this is very, very playable. I am not noticing much of anything going on here, which is pretty nice. Well, yeah, there's Super Nintendo doing its thing. Controller works just fine. Everything looks and sounds exactly as you'd expect it to. God, I love Donkey Kong Country. What a great game. Alright, I guess let's move on to Sega Genesis. Okay, now we have the Sega Genesis, and I thought it would be fun to control the Sega Genesis game with a Super Nintendo controller and see how that goes. And looks like it goes just fine. Here I am playing Sonic 2 with a Super Nintendo controller, and it's, again, the input lag doesn't seem to be anything to write home about. And the game is running just fine. This one also sounds pretty spot on, so that is good. And, you know, all the visual effects are working the way they're supposed to. This is Sonic 2, and it's running the way it's supposed to. And I'm not great at Sonic games, but they're pretty fun. There you go. That's the long and the short of the way this connects to an HDMI device. But let's try one more thing, shall we? Alright, so I've switched over to the CRT because I wanted to see how it reacts to light guns. So we got Duck Hunt, we've got a zapper, and let's see. Okay, well, it fires up, so that's one thing. But let's see if I can actually hit any ducks with this thing. And goodbye, dog. Here we go. Oh, man. Look at that. So if you want to hook this up AV to your CRT TV and use an old zapper, light gun games seem to work just fine. And that is the... Yeah, got him. That is the basics of the Classiq III functioning on both an HD TV and a CRT. There you go. Alright, so a few last things about the Classiq III before we go. Thing number one, I said earlier that I thought this should glow, and it does. There's a switch on the back, boom. You've got this thing glowing here, and you've got all these LEDs that go all around the system, so it's actually a pretty wild looking once it's glowing. This would look pretty nice on the shelf as just a decoration piece. So that's neat. Just flick that on and off through the switch on the back. Now the other thing I wanted to mention is this is designed to use NES, Super NES, and Genesis cartridges. That's what it's made for. Now, I threw a whole bunch of other things at it just to see what I could make work. The FX Pack Pro for Super Nintendo, that worked great. The Mega SD for Genesis did not work. The EverDrive N8 Pro and regular N8, neither of those worked either. So if you're getting this to get flash carts working on your TV, then your mileage may vary. I don't know the real science of why which ones worked and which ones didn't. There's things online that say that Genesis flash cards do work in it. Maybe the EverDrive does and the Mega SD doesn't. I'm not really sure, but if you're getting this for flash cards, just know it's kind of a mileage may vary situation. But other than that, that's the Classiq Q. It is available now at StoneAgeGamer.com, so you can play all of your old NES, Super NES, and Genesis cartridges on your modern TV or even on your old TV without having to track down an original console to play them on. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you like what you saw here today, please follow, comment, like, subscribe, share it around. Let us know in the comments if you get a Classiq III, what's the first game you're going to play on it. If it's Blaster Master 2 for Sega Genesis, good on you. I like that game. Nobody else seems to, but I think it's a great choice. Anyway, thanks again for watching. On behalf of all of us here at Stone Age Gamer, keep playing games.